Hi, my name is Nat Sanders. I am the writer, blogger, and speaker behind areasonableway.com. I'm here today with Bill and Jeremy, and this is the Happy Hippie Jesus Show.
I don't know how many guests have gotten right on the first time, but I feel like we're on a roll.
We are. Natalie, Nat, you did fantastic. Sorry, my sister's name is Natalie, so I'm moving over to Natalie by habit.
I do both.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Yeah. Well, Bill, in honor of this streak of people getting our name right, I want to let you ask Natalie the question.
Jeremy is under this delusion that we are confining Jesus to first century Israel. But, Jesus is eternal. And so I've got this question for you. Do you think that Jesus is a hippie?
Well, Jeremy actually prepped me, so I knew I was going to get this question. And so I did a little research, and this is the definition of hippie. A person of unconventional appearance, typically long hair, who is associated with a subculture involving a rejection of conventional values. Wait, so I was like, yes, Jesus, or at least potentially Jesus. And then it says, and the taking of hallucinogenic drugs.
I reject that last portion.
Well, and you can look at it like maybe the wine of that day was a little iffy, so it's possible, but I would say that Jesus is at least part hippie.
All right.
I'm just going to claim victory. Jesus is only part hippie, which means that he's definitely not a hippie.
That doesn't make any sense.
My college logic teacher would have taken it.
Yeah, I agree.
Bill.
Yes.
Tell me a story that kind of sheds light on how you see Jesus. You can't make our guests do all the work.
But it's okay, go, because I'll hear you do it anyway.
Okay, a story about how I see Jesus. The story that tells me who Jesus is the most is when Jesus approaches a funeral procession, and the widow comes to Jesus, and she says, "My son, my only son has died. Have mercy on him." And Jesus raises him from the dead. Now, what speaks to me about Jesus in that story is that, one, he's bringing this guy back. And if you've already been in heaven, do you really want to come back? You're thinking about this. But the reason he brings back her son is not because she has lost her son or that she's in grief. She has lost her only form of support. Her husband is dead. She has no other sons. And in that day and time, women can't own property. They don't have jobs. And they completely rely on the support of their male relatives. So without her son, she is destitute. Jesus isn't coming there to raise her son from the dead, but to meet her need.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he did it in the most practical way possible.
All right.
I like that. I think for me, the story that best shows how I see Jesus is the very common story, or commonly heard story, of the Good Samaritan. And there are some pieces about that story that are so important to me and how I view Jesus and how I walk in the world. And most people know, of course, there is a man laying beaten on the side of the road, and a religious man walks past and looks the other way. Another person walks past, looks the other way, and the third man stops and helps. And to me, the most important part of this story is that the person who stops doesn't ask why this man is broken or how he was beaten. He doesn't ask if it was his fault or someone else's fault. He just offers him help. He picks him up off of the ground and cares for him, and in a lasting way. He cares for him, his physical needs first, but then he leaves him in the care of someone else and offers him some long-term care in that way. And to me, that just says so much about Jesus and where he meets people, despite how they arrived at being broken, and that his care and his love is long-term. It's there to see to all of the needs and all of the pieces of that brokenness that we all struggle through.
Sure. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your project, A Reasonable Way, and maybe how it got started.
Yeah, so I can give you the short version, or we can do the long version.
We're going to go long version. We've got like a whole podcast to fill.
Okay, so This is a kind of a long story. When I was 19, I kind of gave up religion. I had grown up Methodist, and I just saw some things in the world that, to me, places in the world where religion failed to share the love of Christ with others. And it was a real turnoff for me. At that same time, I was kind of in my own seeking, in my own wandering also in my personal life. So I prayerfully decided to distance myself from Christianity. Over the next 15 years, I would dabble in other religions. I would study Hinduism or Buddhism, but rarely did I come back to Christianity. And then in 2012, Jesus just started showing up in my head. And I'd like to have a better way of saying it, but it's the truth. I found myself pondering how Jesus cared for others. I would randomly remember scriptures that I'd heard when I was younger, kind of first thing when I woke up in the morning or last thing when I fell asleep. Spirituality and Christ, even churches would kind of drift into my consciousness. And at that point, I was a pretty adamant agnostic at times, atheist at times, and I would always kind of shove those feelings aside. But eventually it was just too compelling, and I was spending way too much time thinking about it. And so I decided to act on that by going to churches and interviewing pastors and preachers and priests. And I did find in a lot of ways that religion can be faulty. It can fail to love people where they are. It can be self-righteous. It can involve a whole lot of bigotry. But there was one pastor in particular who really changed my mind. And he didn't necessarily try to convince me, but he allowed me to be where I was and just said, you don't have to convert, just come and see. It doesn't always look that way, just come and see. And so, a year and a half later, on a random Sunday morning, my husband was out of town for work in Florida, and I woke up and dressed a 6-month-old baby and a 2.5-year-old little boy, and showed up very hesitantly, very awkwardly to church. I mean, we didn't even have Sunday clothes, and I just showed up, and I sat through the sermon, and it was good, but I didn't have any thoughts that I would for sure stay or for sure come back. And I went home that afternoon and laid my kids out on a blanket in the backyard. It was January, but it was like beautiful outside, and we had a picnic. And then my sister called, and she was frantic and crying. She told me that my dad had died of a massive heart attack. And in that moment, I just said a little prayer, to an unfamiliar God, really, at this point. And I really needed to lean into something in that moment. And that was the first day that I went to church since my youth. And I have been most Sundays since. And I feel like God and church and Jesus and spirituality have really filled that gap left kind of by my father's death, and also the other holes. So from that point on, Jesus was in everything to me. I just saw him everywhere. And more and more, the longer my faith has gone on, I just want to lean into that, especially the fundamental teachings of Christ more and more. So in 2016, there were a lot of things going on at once. A very politically divisive election, enormous suicide rates, the opioid crisis, consumer debt numbers are through the roof. And I was thinking about Jesus, and I was thinking about all of these things in the world around us. And at this point, I'd already been starting to really study the New Testament and the teachings of Christ, but I wasn't sure how that was all going to come together, or why I felt so led to do so much research in the New Testament. And in 2016, those ideas just started to come together to form a reasonable way. And its purpose is to connect the dots between modern culture and spirituality and the research and science behind joy and contentment and health. And this year especially, I'm just really trying to focus and center those conversations on the fundamental practices and teachings of Christ.
Now, you mentioned at the beginning of your story that you became dissatisfied with the church. And you went away. Was there anything that was like a straw that broke the camel's back moment?
Yeah, there definitely were. I was raised in a rural town, and I have my whole life been a questioner. So I have always been kind of a doubter, and I've been called Doubting Thomas more than once. And I've always, had big questions about God and faith and spirituality and the universe and how that all works. At 19, I was a counselor at a religious church camp, and I had some questions at the end of that process for kind of the spiritual teachers that were there, the Christian leaders that were there, and also the Christian leaders at my home church and at my college, kind of centered around the contradictions in the Bible. And while now I have a lot of people in my life who've been able to answer those for me or help me walk through those contradictions or juxtapositions, at that time, people just dismissed my questions. And so to me, it made it feel as though the Bible was invalid. It's like I couldn't get a grasp for how some of those things worked out. And then also the way that I see Jesus, and even the way I saw Jesus before, is this very kind and loving, very gentle, humble, welcoming person in the world. And a lot of pastors and preachers that I saw, it was more about judgment and self-righteousness. And I just really struggled to find God in that.
I think once a lot of young people get to college that have been raised in Christian homes, when they are faced with being able to ask those same questions for themselves,
right.
They start to see, go to classes and learn about science and learn about evolution, and then they go back to their scripture and these things don't add up.
Right.
It becomes a stumbling block for them. Instead of seeing scripture as holy writing that is God's people wrestling with who God is, instead of a history book.
Right. I totally agree. Right. And of course, in hindsight, and then that's something to think about, like, how do we really help people transition through that process? And it takes a very open-minded, very gentle hand to help guide them rather than shame that through that period.
There's a lot of people that don't go to church from 18 to 25.
Right.
I didn't go to church a lot in that time period for some of those reasons. It's an interesting question. How do we guide through that? Or is that a journey some of us need to go on?
Absolutely. Someone asked me, what do you think about that time? Do you feel like you missed out on God during that time? Or, do you feel shameful about that time? But the answer for me, in my own heart for that, is absolutely not. I do not think I would be where I am today. I don't think I would have this opportunity or be on this path or calling or whatever you want to call it without those years of separation from God. I needed to rediscover God in a new way that was unfamiliar to me at the time. Sometimes
it's just our journey.
I know, right?
And our journey doesn't have to look like what we think it's supposed to look like.
Right.
I think it's a Buddhist saying, but it says when the student is ready, the master will appear.
Yes.
It takes some of us longer to be ready than others. Yeah.
I'm longer to be ready.
But Scripture shows if you read the Gospels, there is no one way to Christ that shows up in any of the stories. Jesus comes to people in different ways all through the Gospels.
Right.
And before the show started, we were talking about Paul's journey.
Right.
Everybody's got their own journey, and we need to allow people to have that journey.
Right. Yeah. Definitely. And there again, not to judge their journey or not to point fingers at their journey or to shame their journey, but just acknowledge, like, this is where you are when you're ready or when God is ready for you or when Jesus is ready for you, that will come,
Now, did you find on your journey there were other people that wanted you to have the same journey they had towards God and almost insisted on that was the only way to get back to God?
I have, and I still have people who don't approve of my journey. It doesn't look in a way that's familiar to them. And that's okay, right? Because sometimes perceiving other things that you're not familiar with is hard. I mean, it's hard for all of us. But for sure, I had people who wanted my journey to look a certain way and have tried to shape it a certain way. And sometimes that's helpful and it works or it fits. And I feel like God has sent them, right, to guide me in one direction or another. And then sometimes it doesn't fit. And in those times, I hope by not following their vision of my journey, I'm making the right choice and just try to be prayerful about those decisions.
That's all we have, right?
Yeah, it's the best you can do.
It's the best I got. And some days it feels like enough and some days not so much.
Right.
But yeah, you recently wrote a blog post about sacred spaces.
Yeah.
You want to tell us, I guess, first what a sacred space is for you, and then how did you find your places?
Yeah, so for me, there are spaces, especially along this journey. I'll say that when I was kind of agnostic, atheist, I didn't really think about these things very often. And maybe some of these spaces existed then too. They were definitely peaceful spaces to me. But on this journey that has been really hard for me, to be honest, it's been a struggle. I found myself really needing to lean into these spaces where I feel like I am as close to God as I can possibly be. And for me, those three sacred spaces are the Ouachita National Forest, Lake Ouachita, church, and the yoga mat. And I've gotten some pushback on the yoga mat too. Some people aren't comfortable with the idea of honoring Jesus on a yoga mat. But for me, these are the places that I feel like I hear God either through other people or my distractions are allowed to fall away enough that I can kind of feel my intuition or gain insight into God's intention for my life.
Yeah, I think yoga mats are perfectly fine.
Yeah, I do too. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I think we can honor Jesus wherever we're at, right?
Right.
Yeah,
I think so too.
I just got back from the Holy Land, and for me, the Holy Land is usually very academic,
right.
Almost. And a lot of it's because there's some commercialization that's going on. But I got to the Western Wall this time.
Well, first we need to push pause. Bill says, like, going to the Holy Land's academic, like he's been 100 times. You've been twice, man.
Right, okay. All right.
Look at Jeremy calling you.
I know it. Anyway,
carry on with your story
I've never
now.
been.
So I get to the Western Wall. And this is important to the story, okay?
Okay.
Yeah. I get to the Western Wall, and I have my moment while I'm there praying. But I can't dwell in it because I feel like I've stepped into somebody else's sacred space. That is the Jewish people's sacred space. And I feel like I've intruded on it. And so I feel like I've got to back out, but I still had my moment.
So what part of that made you think you had to back out? I mean, Jesus was a Jew, right? I mean, there's some tie-in together.
Right. There is, but it made me feel like, I have walked into somebody else's house.
Right.
And I've sat in the good chair.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've sat in the good chair long enough. It's time to let the owner of the house be in the good chair.
Right. Yeah,
I don't know. As I've also been twice, and I have not gone down to the wall either time. Because it's just, no. And it's some of those same feelings. I'm like, that's your space. And I don't want to, intrude in your space. I don't know. It's probably all in my head, and maybe I should talk to my therapist about it or something. But it just hasn't felt like that's mine to go to.
No, I get it. I really do. I get it. It's like you've walked into somebody else's house.
Yeah.
So what about you? Where do you have other sacred spaces other than the church, or where? What about?
So nature is always a sacred.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I think there's something about creation and just leaving yourself and all that stuff behind that it's often a quieter place and a place to connect. When I was living here in Little Rock, there's a place called the Arkansas House of Prayer that's connected to an Episcopal church, St. Margaret's Episcopal, I think, out there. And I loved that space, and I would go on a lot of Fridays and sit. So those are kind of the spaces for me.
Mine is nighttime by the ocean. Just sitting in the sand, letting the breeze hit me, watching the waves come in. It feels very holy in that moment.
Right.
It's just like you and God. And then, I really, during the springtime and the summertime, my deck is a really great sacred space for me. And it's convenient, too, because it's right at my house.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Like Jeremy said, places in nature, and you mentioned the beach. And the very first post that I ever wrote was called Into the Wilderness, and it talked about going out into nature, which Jesus did, right? Especially to me in his most tumultuous moments. He would go to the mount, or he would rest in the sea, or he would go to the Garden of Gethsemane, And part of that, I'm sure, was to get away from people, right? But he could have locked himself in a closet. I mean, he didn't even out, And I do think that there is that connection. And then science and research, I cannot even begin to tell you how much it supports not just the emotional benefits of walking in nature, but the health benefits. Like, it lowers your cortisol, it lowers your blood pressure, it increases your immune capability. It's mind-blowing. So it's always been so, fascinating for me that people really feel that in nature. And Jesus obviously kind of sought that, either intentionally or unintentionally. And for me, that really resonates too. And apparently for you guys also.
Most of the time, our bodies, our souls, we kind of know what we need if we'll just be still and quiet long enough to figure it out. Like, we intuitively know that we need nature, and we've got some scientific research to back that up. And we kind of know when we need a nap, or when we need a quiet space, or it's just being still and listening.
So hard.
Yeah, we've lost some of that.
Yeah, listening in general is hard. And sometimes you don't always want to hear the answer, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's inconvenient.
Exactly. And then doctors even say that, part of the reason that Americans suffer from so much depression is we disconnect ourselves from nature. We're indoors so much under these fluorescent lights that we brought you into today. And
Well, you can't hook all this up out in the yard.
I feel like you're trying to take me to hippie land again.
Are we coming full circle?
We are.
Yeah. Do you have a word or a story maybe about your journey or being displaced from faith that would resonate? I mean, we have a number of Methodist listeners right now that might feel a little displaced or discouraged, or just people in general. There's always times that we feel separated from God.
This is honestly something I've been thinking about a lot, and it's not so much a story, but to be honest, to give you it in the context of part of a story. Of course, I spent 15 years separated from God, and in that time, especially at the end, I found myself, I can actually remember the feeling. I was so cynical and so, not bitterness in like a spitting bitter kind of way, but it just wasn't joyful. I had a really hard time feeling the light. And I really do believe that it was kind of wrapped up in this disconnect between God and I. But I feel like we need those times. And one of the things that I think we do in our culture a lot, even in our religion and Christianity, is that we're asked to lean fully into faith and to dismiss those feelings, and you should be able to just have faith. You should be able to always believe. You should have this immaculate faith walk that you look encouraging and inspiring. And sometimes I feel like we need to honor the fact that people just are where they are. We need to say to them, I see and hear that you're feeling separated. I see and hear and understand your frustration. And for all of us, I think we need to just acknowledge that and then dig really deep and say, what is the lesson in this? What is God trying to teach me in my dissatisfaction right now? And then in that piece, in the digging and in the searching and in the separation, try to find some hope or a positive thing that might come from the pain we experience. Barbara Brown Taylor talks a lot about the light and the darkness, and I really appreciate her work.
Is it helpful just to say, I'm not in a good place right now?
Oh my gosh. Yes. And I met somebody in the grocery store the other day and I said, hey, how are you? You know, like we do. And she was like, you know what? Honestly, I'm not good. And it caught me off guard, right? Because we don't do that in our culture. And she was like, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have just said that. And I was like, no, like, this is beautiful. Like, I'm so thankful you said this thing to me that we are so afraid to say to one another. And so she just spilled her whole story. And we don't say that enough.
Yeah, that's good. I found myself, I guess, yesterday, Sunday, I had done a wedding out of town, like Saturday night, and I'd gotten home at like midnight, 1. And I was at church Sunday morning, and I had to teach a Sunday school class, and I was like, I'm sorry, I'm just not my best self today. And they all just kind of chuckled, and they're like, Jeremy, we'll take you with whatever version of yourself you are. And I was like, well, thanks, but know that you're not getting the best version of me. And that's kind of life, right? We're not our best all the time.
Right. And it gives people an opportunity to show you grace and love and mercy, right? If we're always our best face forward, then we don't have that opportunity to be loved where we are.
Well, we live in a culture, though, that we're supposed to be strong enough to carry ourselves always.
Always.
So with that in mind, as you've been writing your blog, have you found that there are others that are connecting with the same kind of struggle that you've had in the past? And what kind of community has that made for you?
Yeah, I have. And any time I go right on and admit when I have struggled or been broken or felt separated from God, that really resonates with other people. And this is new, right? I started this project in September. So it's new. And like you guys, I'm still, just in the beginnings of kind of building this community. But it's been really interesting. I have people who follow me that are Methodists. And I have people who follow me that are atheists. And I have people who are kind of on the fringes or kind of mixed spirituality. And then I also have some people who are kind of more into a traditional word for word, literal understanding of the Bible. So it's diverse, and that's exactly what I wanted, and that's what I hope and try to be mindful about continuing, because I think we can learn from each other so much in that way if we can have that diverse community in some places. And then in some places you just need your people, right? Like your people who understand like you do. But I like the diversity so far, Yeah.
I've always thought that is what's beautiful about the Methodist Church. That's a thing that we're most in danger of losing right now.
Right. I agree. It'll be interesting to see how that unfolds, right?
Yeah, it will be. It's a journey in itself.
It is a journey in itself. And in the beginning of it, I had a lot of discouraging feelings about the vote and where that fell. And I felt like it didn't leave much room for some people to find God in the vote, right? But also, someone said to me, maybe this is part of the unfolding. Maybe this is a piece that allows us more time to really consider how it needs to look or how it can look. Maybe the right vote wasn't there. And we always have to be looking for those opportunities, right? Again, like what can we learn from this thing and this discomfort to see where it leads and be hopeful, maintain hope in there somewhere.
Yeah, as a middle class, or I guess decidedly middle class white guy, I'm not used to things not going my way.
Right.
I mean, right. We'll just own my white male privilege in that moment.
It's uncomfortable, isn't it?
Yeah. Like things are supposed to go my way, and I usually get what I want. So there is like some of that, and maybe some lessons to be learned.
Dang it.
I was talking to someone, and she said, Jeremy, I'm black. Hope's all I've got, or something was like her comment, and I just laughed. I'm like, I'm not used to that feeling.
Haven't thought of that much lately.
So maybe that's what's there for me to learn in this moment, is that sometimes life doesn't go the way I want, and that's okay.
Douglas Adams, he was a British comedy writer. Mm-hmm. And the British have such a wonderful way of putting things that make you feel better. He called the journey you went on and the journey that the church is going on, he called it the long, dark tea time of the soul.
Yes. I love it.
And then adding tea time in there, just, it's like, okay, we're just going to sit. We're going to sip our tea and we're going to make it through.
Right. we're going to have some biscuits.
Yeah.
And we're going to hang out for this thing that we're doing.
And we're going to see what God does here.
Right.
Yeah. Because what happens at the end of the darkness? There comes the light.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. We have a hard time stumbling around in the dark instead of stopping.
Mm-hmm.
And going, let's wait for the light.
Right.
So Douglas has told us, let's have some tea and some biscuits and wait for the light to shine.
Yeah. I like it.
I guess in this season of Lent,
Yeah.
we can't just skip straight to resurrection, huh? We've got to go through that journey.
Yeah.
You know,
it's uncomfortable. I'd rather not.
I know. This is maybe totally off topic, but so this year I didn't give anything up for Lent. I honestly was like, most years I have this like really convicted feeling thing that I'm supposed to do. And this year I was like, I don't know what to do. And I was kind of beating myself up about it. So, do you have an opinion about that? Should I have given something up for Lent?
I don't know. I consider giving up Methodism.
No, I bet you did. I bet you did.
I grew up Southern Baptist, and for 22, 23 years, I never gave up anything for Lent, and Jesus still loved me.
Right.
So,
right.
I'll say, sometimes I worry that we trivialize like Lent with, I'm going to give up soda or M&Ms or something
like that. And somehow is comparable to the crucifixion or the suffering of Christ or whatever.
40 days in the wilderness.
Right. Yeah, so, no, I think you're good.
Okay, thanks. Needed some conversation.
I like the idea of adopting something for Lent.
Yeah, I've heard that one.
I like that a lot. To take up a new spiritual practice or to care for somebody during Lent.
Right.
And in that way, you're doing positive.
Right.
You're advancing the kingdom.
Right. Kind of sharing the love of Christ with someone else.
Exactly. Because I checked, and the lack of Dr. Pepper never held the kingdom, never brought the kingdom a little bit more forward.
Although there's something to be said for those sneaky giving things up for Lent that are actually good for you. Right. You're like, I'm going to give up soda and candy for Lent, and I'm going to lose that 10 pounds right before summer. Win-win, 2 birds with 1 stone.
Done and done.
I gave up French fries one year for Lent, and it was the hardest thing I ever had to do because that is like my go-to salt thing.
Right. I gave up alcohol for Lent one year.
Whoa. Let's not go crazy here.
I know, right? And, I'm not a huge drinker, but I'm kind of a consistent drinker.
Yeah.
It was challenging and also very rewarding.
Yeah. All right, I take it back. I'm sorry for everyone that I just made up fun of for giving up trivial things for Lent. Maybe they are good for you. And,
it's okay, Jeremy. You can judge.
And as I go through this life, I find myself wanting more and more of the conversations I've had back, and maybe Bill will just edit that one out. And I can have it back.
I tried to give up Jeremy for Lent, but he just keeps popping up like a bad fungus.
Especially since you're wearing a shirt with his face on it attached to some moth wings.
It's actually a white butterfly.
Oh, yes,
Jeremy is the white butterfly.
In Bill's mind.
That is his nickname in the conference. A lot of people don't know that. Yeah, he is the white butterfly.
But you're going to be sure that they learn about it.
Yes, exactly. That was podcast 3.
Yeah.
Okay,
where Jeremy did not have enough coffee and Bill beat me to a joke.
Dang it.
It's the worst, yeah.
It's painful.
And it was. Like I had the same joke lined up and Bill got there first.
And I even had a T-shirt made up. It's great.
To celebrate his one victory.
So, did either of you kind of have wayward journeys? I was talking to a pastor the other day, and he was like, you know what? I pretty much have loved the Methodist Church since my youth. And, yeah, is that you, Bill?
Oh, yeah. See, I got my call when I was like 4 or 5 years old.
Stop it. I love these stories.
And I told my church when I was like 13 or 14 that this is what I wanted to do. And then all of a sudden, everybody's like saying, Bill, a pastor wouldn't think that joke was funny. Bill, a pastor wouldn't have hair that long. I've shown them on that. Right? But, Bill, a pastor wouldn't wear that T-shirt. But all these things were okay before I said that. I was still a good Christian. I was a good, and I said. He was
a good Baptist.
Yeah, I said, God, you know what? If this is what it's going to be like, I don't want anything to do with it. I'll be a youth director. I'll do a youth director. So that lasted for maybe a year or so. And I said, God, I'll write for you. And then it went to, I'm in college in a punk band. And so, And then I didn't actually go into the ministry until my 30s when my wife looked at me and said, "You're miserable, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes." She goes, "You'd rather be working in the church, wouldn't you?" And I said, "Yes." She goes, "Then go do it, stupid." And so,
smart one.
And that's the way my life usually works: is somebody says, "Go do it, stupid."
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's nice to have, right?
It is.
I feel like I always have to kind of figure it out. I need more of
I need people.
I need your people to come and be like, just go do it.
Yeah, just go do it.
I love people that are willing to look at me and say, "Stupid."
Yes. Yes. We need to be that person for each other.
Yes.
I like that journey.
It was fine. I grew up in a Baptist church.
You did?
I did. And I don't know, I went through a period. I didn't go to church a lot between, 17 and 24, 17 and 25. And I wasn't, atheist or agnostic. I just wasn't interested in getting out of bed on Sundays.
Right.
And I didn't really think about God very much during that period.
Right.
So, I don't know, it's not comparable to other people's journeys. But I would say I was neither straight and narrow my whole life, nor did I ever have this wandering way off course. I just kind of went through maybe a normal growing up, and do I actually want to go to church, or do I want to do this or that? And for me, it was always a question of maybe relevance. How is church fitting into my life, or how is my life better because I'm going to church?
Right.
Maybe I just wasn't ready to hear that answer for a while.
Right.
So, yeah.
And maybe you weren't meant to hear that answer for a while.
Maybe.
I mean, it's kind of blasphemy sounding, but maybe.
No.
God has a time and place for us. God knows when we're ready. I
think so.
Think about Paul. He went through this, as Saul went through oppressing the church, and then all of a sudden, bam, on the road to Damascus, Jesus says, "It's time."
Right.
It's time, And God, Jesus could have done that at any point.
Right.
But he had to wait till Paul was ready, because Jesus meets us where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
Not where Jesus wants us to be, but where we're at. And what's frustrating about that is generally where Jesus wants us to be is way away from where we're at, and it's a long journey.
Right. I was reading something. I've seen it twice this week, actually, but it says something like, if you're not ready for God's plan for you, that's okay. He'll come back around. If you're not ready now, that's all right. He's not going to leave you.
God's got all the time in existence.
Right.
Yeah. So, Nat, what is saving your soul right now?
I think what is saving my soul right now is really community. I feel like, it's an interesting dynamic for me right now because I have a lot of doubt. This journey for me is a little scary. I have not done a lot of public speaking in the past. This is my first podcast. So all of these things for me are new, and I'm an introvert, and these things are way outside of my typical comfort zone. And so I have a lot of fear behind that, but I have this community of people, everyone from family to my closest friends to the pastors in my life that I know and love, to people online who will send me encouraging messages about how they received something I wrote or how it inspired them on their journey. And for me, it's just, I feel like God or Jesus are really offering me the people in my life that I need to sustain the path that I'm on. And I am so grateful for that right now. And it is just totally filling my cup.
Is there any other ways that we can find you, or anything that you're working on right
Instagram
now?
And Facebook, it's just at A Reasonable Way on both. And also my personal Facebook is more fun because there are more people and it's more interactive, and that's just Nat Sanders.
Cool. Thanks for being on and hanging out with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much.